Hello.
Okay. Um, let's see. Start video. Okay.
There you are. There you are.
Hey,
Hi,
hey, Malcolm.
hi, Mark. How are you doing, sir? It's great
I'm
to see.
okay.
Very good to see
I'm
you again.
okay. A little bit shaken up because yesterday was the Combatants for Peace joint Memorial Day service. Um, Very moving, very sad, and very hopeful, but all rolled into one.
What was the nature of that event? I'm sorry.
Well, I've become affiliated with Combatants for Peace,
Oh, I see. Okay.
which is, are you familiar with it at all?
Not really. No.
No, it's a wonderful group of Israeli veterans and Palestinian combatants
Hmm.
who have joined together, laid down their arms, um, and every year they have a joint Memorial Day celebration.
Excellent.
I think this was the 19th year
Hmm.
that they did it. And it was the better part of 2 hours with just an incredible presentation of Jews and Palestinians joining together. And of course, searingly painful and sad at the same time.
Yeah,
Um,
I can
And then
imagine.
on Wednesday, and today, of course, is so-called Independence Day, um, uh, following on that, on Memorial Day in
Hmm.
Israel.
Hmm.
And then Wednesday, there's Combatants for Peace also holds a joint Nakba Memorial Day. So it's quite a week.
Yeah, it's a lot of events all lumped into one. Um, so, Mark, for my viewers, I would like you to I know for you it's probably going over old territory, but I think it's very important to share your story. So I'm just going to kind of let you do that. You know, we met at the screening of the film Israelism, and you
Oh,
spoke.
you were there. Okay,
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
Malcolm.
I didn't really
I'm
have
so
much chance to.
dense. I've caught up with myself. Okay, so
Well,
you got to hear me a little bit. So
yeah,
wonderful.
and it was fascinating to hear you speak, and so I wanted to share that with our audience. Going back to your, as you had explained, you were a dyed-in-the-wool Zionist, or well, I mean,
Very much.
you're in the IDF, so I'd like you to discuss as much of that as you can because it's just really interesting and informative and educational.
Sure, sure. When I was a very little boy, um, before kindergarten, I would wander around the neighborhood and knock on people's doors, and housewives would be home, and it was my cookie patrol. I would ask for cookies, and they were always afraid to engage me because I would tell my whole life story, and if they interrupted, I would start at the beginning again. So I'm used to telling my life story.
All right.
Uh, so I was born in Beverly, Massachusetts, right near Peabody, which was a leather manufacturing center, and that's where my maternal family was, and where my father, a refugee from Nazi Germany, came there because he had gotten through a tanner's apprenticeship, started it in Nazi Germany, and all the Jews were thrown out of work. So he was excluded from that apprenticeship. But then, just before his 18th birthday, he got onto the Kinder transport
Mm.
along with 10,000 other Jewish children, and went to the UK. And he was able to finish his apprenticeship there. But then when he finished it, they said, "Well, now you're an adult. You can work, so you have to leave because we don't want anybody here who will compete with British labor." So, so fortunately, he was one of the very few Jews who was able to get into the United States because he had family who had come here in the 1920s, and they sponsored him into the U.S. And he went to this leather manufacturing town, and there he met my mother, who was a bookkeeper at the factory. And when I was 6 months old, the whole family moved to Philadelphia, where my maternal grandfather's extended family had come through Boston along with my grandfather, and then they went down to Philadelphia. So there I was. I grew up in Philadelphia. I was born in 1948, not an inauspicious year, of
No,
course.
not at all.
And then, so what I like to say is that my education as a young person really consisted of three parts. First of all, I grew up in the days when Philadelphia had a really wonderful public school system. I went to a really excellent elementary school. Um, Junior high school was junior high school. It was a terrible age to be. So what can you say good about being, 12, 13, 14 in junior high school? And then I went to wonderful all academic magnet school, Central High School, which is in Philadelphia terms a storied academic high school, um, and I got a phenomenal education there. Um, and so that was my public education. And in parallel with my public education, I got also really very, very fortunate, an amazing Jewish education. Because in Philadelphia, there was a college, Gratz College, and it trained Hebrew teachers. So these were uh, training for Hebrew teachers to teach in the Hebrew schools. And the Hebrew schools in those days were the format of 2 afternoons a week for 2 hours, and then Sunday morning for 2 hours. So the format when I was a little boy started out there because my parents were, because of their Zionist background, which I'll explain in a moment, they did not want me to go to a synagogue Hebrew school. They were not religious. They were really anti-religious, but they were extremely uh, it was Jewish education, Jewish learning, Jewish knowledge was very, very important to them. And I got to go to this great Hebrew school,
Mhm.
so that it wasn't just one of these Hebrew schools where they prepare you with a few prayers and to be able to just get up in front of the congregation and not embarrass your family at your bar mitzvah. It was much more involved with that than that. It was a great education. And that took me from elementary school all the way through college at Gratz College because I was being trained to be a Hebrew teacher. That got short circuited when I went to Israel. I'll just do a little name drop here, and that is that two of my very, very best teachers, one of whom was the principal of the elementary department, were Elsie and Will Chomsky. And if you take the CH and you translate it into Chomsky, then you can guess what family I was adjacent to in
Oh,
Philadelphia. Uh,
gosh.
Not so much to Noam, but to his brother and his brother's family that I knew from the third part of my education, which was my very, very intense labor Zionist upbringing. My grandfather had come from Russia, already a devoted labor Zionist, and the labor Zionist party was really aligned the same party as Ben Gurion came from. And I, at age 11, was sent for the first time to labor Zionist summer camp in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And that started really a life of just incredible intensity. And now I look back on it, I talk about it as having been indoctrinated, but at, in my youth, I would have said I grew up in this labor Zionist youth group, Habonim, and the really intensity of the summer experience, 8 weeks of just uh, to- total immersion in Zionism
Mhm.
and singing and dancing and discussions and lectures, aside from all the fun things that you do in summer camp, sports and swimming and girls and boys and all kinds of things. But
Mhm.
it was really intense. And then during the off months, the 10 months of the year, we also had meetings, and it was kids leading kids. I mean, our counselors, our youth leaders, and the oldest ones were college kids. And I started being a youth leader in Habunim when I was in high school. And I would, on a Saturday, I would go around and pick up younger kids who had gotten
Can I
involved and take them to meetings. And that led eventually to, first of all, my going off as a volunteer just before the Six-Day War at the
can I
end of,
interrupt you for one
sure.
moment? Would you describe your upbringing as a fairly typical Jewish American experience, or
Not at all.
not at all?
No, I'm glad you asked. Yeah, it's a great question. It was not at all a typical experience. First of all, going to a Hebrew school the way I went to a Hebrew school, where it was really Jewish learning. It was the type of learning that really goes back to the Jewish Enlightenment, which started in the 18th century in Berlin with Moses Mendelssohn. It was Jewish learning that was not necessarily connected to rabbis and synagogues.
I
So
see.
that already was a departure from what the typical Jewish kid in America had. And then the other thing was this intense Zionist experience. Up until 1967, up until the Six-Day War, the Jews in America were lukewarm at best towards Israel and Zionism. If they related to Israel, it was kind of like a charity case. But the message, even at Gratz College, was just pipe down with that Zionism stuff. We don't really want to hear about it. We don't want our American credentials as good Americans of the Jewish faith to be called into question dual loyalty. So no, it was atypical.
So
And in
how did the Six Day War change all of that?
Well, up until that time, our indoctrination, quite correctly, in my opinion, had called out the emptiness of American Jewish life. And so we were told, if you want to live a really meaningful Jewish life, the only way to do that is to go to Israel.
Mhm.
And uh, the analysis of the emptiness of American Jewish life, I would venture to say, was correct. Not for everyone, not every, but largely the Jewish Community Center, the JCC, was held up to us as, that's not for you. That's not a real Jewish life. So after in '67, everyone loves a winner. This amazing victory, and um, so that everyone loves a winner. So all of a sudden, American Jews were all in on Zionism and Israel. And so the irony was that I went to Israel starting in 1967 as a volunteer in the Six-Day War, and then came back to the States to another year of college, went back in '68, and went to the Hebrew University for my junior year abroad, dropped out of school because it was so intense, such an intense experience for me. I wanted to be part of it. Dropped out of school, went to live on the kibbutz, and of course, then became, because of law of return, immediately became an Israeli citizen. And then I was drafted into the Israeli army, which is exactly what I wanted. I wanted to be kibbutznik, a farmer, and a soldier. And that was my life's dream, given what I had grown up with. So, what I found in Israel was that the 10 years that I was in Israel were perhaps the least Jewish of all of
Hmm.
my entire life.
I've
The
heard that
Jewish
said, yeah.
content of Israel at that time was, everyone was Jewish, everyone spoke Hebrew. The holidays were the Jewish holidays instead of the holidays we have here in the States. But in terms of real Jewish content of the kind that I had had as a kid growing up, no. And coming back to the States after 10 years, from 1968 to 1978, I was there. That's when I took up, an intense experience as a Jew again. And not that I'm not religious in any way, shape, or form, but that is my culture. That is my heritage. And
So when did you have your, I, I guess I'd call it your Daniel Ellsberg moment. Daniel used to work for the the intelligence community, and he had this sort of epiphany in Vietnam back in the mid early 60s, where he suddenly realized that everything he thought and believed in was wrong. I mean, not all of it, but much of it. His ongoing support for the war, his belief in the system, in the government, was kind of shattered almost. And did you have a similar kind of epiphany, or?
Well, to paraphrase Ernest Hemingway, when asked about bankruptcy, it's gradually and then all at once.
Was
So,
1929 in your head?
yeah. So, there it was no secret to me as time went on that I lived in a racist country in Israel. But that was nothing new. It's not as if I didn't live in a racist country growing up in the United States. And the interesting thing is that um, Palestine and Palestinians practically didn't exist in my Zionist indoctrination because through the 50s and 60s, or from 1948 up until about 1967, Palestine and Palestinians were almost disappeared
Mm-hmm.
from awareness. And so that when I got to Jerusalem in 1968, and was introduced. I won't go into all the details, but somebody from my Kibbutz Urim, had gone to study after the Six-Day War, 1967 to 68, at the Hebrew University, and he met a lot of Palestinians over in East Jerusalem. And when I came back in 68, after my sophomore year to begin my junior year, he introduced me to these Palestinians. And I had no preconceptions about Palestinians because it really was not part of what we learned about. So I just met these really nice, engaging people,
Mm-hmm.
and at that age, you're an open book and you're a tabula rasa. So I just met these great people, Palestinians. So I would spend my days at the university being, an Israeli for all intents and purposes. And then in the evening, I would go over to East Jerusalem and I'd go out eating and drinking with my Palestinian friends. And it was a great experience. And so I was open to them.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't aware of the contradictions. I really didn't know about the Nakba, about what had happened to them. I didn't really understand. I didn't understand at all what it meant for them to be under occupation and how harsh that was. They didn't talk about that with me really.
Well,
Uh,
I wouldn't say that that was, I grew up in Canada, from an Anglo background, and I can't say my sentiments were much different than what you're describing. I mean, the Palestinians when I was growing up were actually portrayed almost as the bad guys because of what happened in 1972 in Munich, for example. Um, there was really no sense of the history at all that we were told. We were actually taught about Israel and the creation of Israel in school, you know. So I wouldn't say that it was it wasn't just a Jewish American concept of the Palestinians at all.
yes, exactly. And if you read Palestinian scholars, Edward Said, Rashid Khalidi, they talk about those years as the years of Palestine virtually being absent from the world stage, and it was before um, the rather unfortunate use of terrorism became the weapon
Yes.
of the Palestinians to get the world's attention. It's a very mixed thing because it got the world's attention in a gruesome way, and the attacks on Israel that began to develop while I was there, starting in 1968, uh, that became a presence, but I didn't connect that violence in Jerusalem, which came pretty close to me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Bombings at the university. I was walking towards the cafeteria at the university in 1968 when all of a sudden the plate glass window of the cafeteria shattered and there was a boom and it came flying out at me. Luckily, it missed me, the shards of glass. I didn't connect that violence with my Palestinian friends. I
Mm-hmm.
connected that with bad guys that wanted to disrupt what was blossoming between us at that time. I didn't understand. I really didn't understand the politics at that point. Then, as time went on, and it's gonna take me a little bit to answer your question, but there were various experiences that I had in my experience. For instance, one experience was that during my military service, I was in advanced infantry training. I was in an airborne unit, and during our training, we were pulled out of the intensive training and sent to the Gaza Strip. And the commanding general of the Southern Command was none other than Arik Sharon. And he had succeeded in this was in 1971. He had succeeded in so brutalizing and inflaming the population of Gaza that he was thrown out of his command, and all the troops under him were thrown out of the Gaza Strip. And we were in the Central Command. We were good boys. We were counted upon not to brutalize the population. So we went patrolling every day in Deir al-Balah, which unfortunately is in the news regularly these days,
Mm-hmm.
one of the important cities, and with a refugee camp not far away. And we patrolled every day. And we didn't, as far as we were concerned, we were the good boys. We didn't beat people up. We didn't break down their doors and smash their furniture and brutalize them. But many years later, when I thought about it, I was the point man. Hammel, the lieutenant, said, "You're a good soldier. You walk point." And I proudly stepped up and walked point. And my sergeant, who was an Iraqi Jew and spoke Arabic, we would stop everyone we met. I carried a light machine gun, which, if you're facing the barrel of a light machine gun, it's a pretty formidable barrel to be facing. And I thought I was a good boy. I wasn't doing anybody any harm. Years later, I thought about that experience, and I was already back in the States. And I thought about my father on the streets of Frankfurt as a teenager being confronted by his classmates and his schoolmates and his neighbors, the kids that he grew up with, who had all joined Hitler Youth. And their idea of a nice afternoon was to put on their Hitler Youth uniforms and go out and beat up the Jewish kids in the class, including my father. And I grew up with the rage that he had, that
Mm-hmm.
exuded, uh, the humiliation, the anger, and I thought many years later that I was not such a good boy that I thought I was. That just the mere fact of holding someone at gunpoint, of uh, making it palpable to them that they were under occupation, that the Palestinians that I stopped went home with that same rage and humiliation and lived with it the same way I had grown up with my father's feelings. And that took many years later for me to realize that.
I see.
That didn't come easily. And then there were other experiences that really made an impression on me in Israel. In the after the Yom Kippur War that I was lucky to have survived, uh, the attack, it very much was a precursor to what we saw on October 7th. Of all the Israeli intelligence community, the army command, the political command, seeing all the signs that something big was going to happen and completely rejecting it the way they did on October 7th. And the army,
What year was the I'm sorry. What year was
1973. I
73?
was
Okay.
already a reservist. I was in a unit that was such a ragtag unit. We were about to be sent into battle, and our brigade commander heard that we had been ordered into battle, and he was being medevaced out. He had been wounded, He was being medevaced out, heard the order for us to go in, and he stopped the order. He said, they'll get slaughtered. They're so unprepared for combat. And that saved my life. It was really, the army was a shambles in 1973. And so after the war, was sent off the kibbutz. The kibbutz sends a certain percentage of its manpower out to do community work. And I was sent out to do some very, very interesting work to work with young kibbutz high school graduates who were volunteering an extra year of service. And I was driving, I was at the office at the central kibbutz office building in Tel Aviv. This would have been probably around 1976 or 7. And the first high-story building, a 10-story building, was being constructed across the street. And the way they built buildings at that time was with external scaffolding. There was 10 stories of scaffolding. And suddenly there was this tremendous crash and boom. 10 stories of scaffolding collapsed. And within a short time, there were ambulances removing bodies that I saw from my office window. And then later, it was a Friday, and I was headed home to the Negev, to my kibbutz, Urim, about a 2-hour drive from Tel Aviv. And like all good Israelis, I turned on the news on the hour to hear the news. And on the news, it said at 10 Dubna, on Dubnov Street, there was this construction catastrophe. No Jews were killed. Malcolm, I've never been kicked in the chest by a mule, but I felt like I was kicked in the chest by a mule. I could not breathe. I couldn't believe my ears. I had to stop the car, pull off the road, stop the car. I couldn't catch my breath. I walked around and around and around the car. I can't believe what I just heard. It must be a mistake. No Jews were killed. I know that people were killed. In those days, construction worker meant Palestinians, the Palestinians who did all the construction work. And so an hour later, I was still on the way home. I turned on the radio again, and the same thing. And I just said to myself, what kind of a country have I ended up in? It was stunning. So that was a 90-degree turn, and um, the real moment came not that many years later, the late 80s. I was already back in the States. I was already a psychologist. I had come back to the States to become a psychologist. I really, after 20 years, from age 11 to age 30, I had had enough of Israel and Zionism. It was really a dead end for me personally. Didn't leave because of the politics. I left because personally, it was just such a dead end. The kibbutz was so provincial, and it was just closing in on me. And during that volunteer experience that I had, we had a lot of contact with graduate students from the University of Tel Aviv psychology program. They would travel with me from site to site where we had volunteers, and I would spend whole days with psychologists, and I got to really like the way they talked and what they did. And so when I decided to leave the kibbutz, it all came together. I'm going to be a psychologist. I'm not going to do it here. I came back to the States and to school and became a psychologist. But in the late 80s, a series of books were published that were based on um, uh, uh, the documents that were published. Israel has a 30-year law that 30 years after the events, all of the government documents are published, are made public. And so 1977 to 1979, all of the documents, the archives that had covered the critical years of Israel becoming a state, 1947 to 1949, the civil war between the Jews and the Palestinians, and the subsequent war with the invasion after the declaration of so-called independence, the so-called Declaration of Independence
Mm-hmm.
on May 15th, 1948. So it took a few years, and then Israeli historians started publishing the truth about 1948. And it was stunning because it was the exact opposite of what we had been taught and of what the world had been taught. First of all, it was very, very clear Israel
So it wasn't like Paul Newman in Exodus or anything like that, was it?
certainly wasn't. But you know, as a teenager, I went to see Exodus with my buddies from Habunim from the Labor Zionists. We went with our special Zionist shirts and everything. And when they raised the flag, we all stood up at attention in the movie theater. I was the only one standing. So it was a brutal war. At the beginning, the Civil War, which came after the UN resolution on November 29th, 1947, where the UN voted to partition Palestine, war broke out. And it was a very, very difficult and bloody war. But by the late winter and early spring, um, the Jews had really gained the upper hand and broken the back of the Palestinian military power. And on when they declared the state on May 15th, you know, it was presented to us as, you know, suddenly these terrible Arab armies, the five Arab armies, were going to attack the newly minted state of Israel, and it was, you know, going to wipe it out. No such thing. Ben Gurion really was not playing Russian roulette when he declared the state. So privately, he was attacked for agreeing to divide the land with the Palestinians. But he said privately, and this was what was published in the 80s. He said, "This is only going to be a springboard for more. Don't worry, we got it." And so by the time independence came, the end of the British Mandate in on May 14th, 1948, the Israeli army had been before state the Haganah, but it became the Israeli Defense Forces, Tzahal, when the state was declared in May, was prepared to. They had more men under arms, more trained soldiers than all of the combined Arab armies. There was a critical period where uh, boatloads of arms that had been purchased in Europe. Don't forget, this was right after World War II. Europe was awash in arms, and especially from the Wehrmacht, from the Nazi army, and they were all on ships. All these arms, and it was just a matter of days, a little over a week, for those arms to get to the ports in the newly minted state of Israel,
Wow,
be dispersed into
such
troops.
a such irony.
So yes, the standard issue rifle, bolt action rifle,
A
which
Mauser or
was
something.
called, pardon?
Mauser? No?
Yes, of course. And a lot of them had swastikas on them, but they were, because came from Czechoslovakia, they were called Czech rifles, but they were really the standard issue Mauser, German arm. So that that it was preordained that they would win the war. Not to mention the fact that the commander of the combined Arab armies was King Abdullah of Transjordan, and he had been set up by the British to be the king of Transjordan. But the Jews, before the state was declared, made a deal with him. They sent secret emissary by the name of Golda Meir.
Mm-hmm.
She would go on a truck wrapped in a rug, and she would go to Amman to meet with the king. And they made a deal. They bought him, and the deal was that he would make sure that the invasion plan of the combined Arab armies was doomed to failure. And not only that, the other part of the deal was that as soon as the British left and Israel declared itself Israel, he would send his troops across the Jordan and swallow up the part of Israel Palestine that was supposed to be the Palestinian state. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how Transjordan became Jordan, because that that the Transjordanians took over the what was supposed to be the Palestinian state,
It's so
and they
interesting that now Queen Rania of Jordan is so outspoken in,
yes.
you know, against
So
what's going on.
so that was part of it. That was part of it. Now, what's going to happen now with Jordan? Because of course, very very large part of the citizenry are Palestinians, and they're up in arms. It was just in the New York Times today that the government in Jordan is skating on very very thin ice
Mm.
by not doing something about its relations with Israel. But the other part that was also published in the late 80s, we had been told, the world had been told, that the Palestinians left because they had been told by their leaders, leave your homes, get out of harm's way, and then you'll be able to go back after we crush the Jews and throw them into the sea and take over their property and live in a Palestinian paradise.
It was that Samuel Clemens, otherwise known as Mark Twain, was once quoted, and I paraphrase him by saying, history never repeats, but it often rhymes. It sounds
Yeah.
very familiar what's happening in Rafah right now.
Yeah, well, it's an ongoing process. I mean, it's been going on really since at least the turn of the 20th century. The plan to get rid of the Palestinians, but what came out, especially the famous book by Israeli historian Benny Morris, "The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem." That was the book, that was the coup de grace in my connection with Israel, because that was neighborhood by neighborhood, city by city, village by village, town by town, the accounting of the systematic ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
1948.
Have you seen the
And
film,
that
the Netflix film? Sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but it was came out about a year and a half ago about the Nakba. It was a portrayal of a young, true account, a young Palestinian girl who hides. Her father goes off and she hides. She's hiding in a sort of food storage shed, and I guess Israel tried to ban it or get it taken off Netflix. But it was, I thought it was a fairly accurate portrayal of those events.
probably. In the late 70s, public television had a documentary that was made in the UK about the ethnic cleansing of 1948. And I remember my parents being really up in arms, and a large part of the Jewish community, cut off their contributions to PBS
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
in outrage that they would have this documentary, which of course the truth. I said to my parents, what's the matter with the truth? I mean, but they were outraged, as was the Jewish community, and then began a period when you couldn't have anything on television, public television, about Palestine without an Israeli spokesperson there as a minder to make sure the public didn't get the wrong impression. And who did they have on a regular basis who was here in the United States as I believe an ambassador at the time? Benjamin Netanyahu would regularly appear on television as the discussant of anything that told the truth about what had gone on with Palestine. And so that was really a shock for me, and it was a shock because it made me look back at my years in Israel. And if you travel to the Negev where I live, and usually by public transportation, you would um, pass through a number of junctions, of road junctions, where there would be a bus station there. You might change buses, or people would get off and go on a bus down the other road, down into the Negev. And the names of those junctions, Masmia, Castina, we would pass by a place called Fallujah, um, what I learned, and they were commonplace names in my everyday life in Israel, and I never gave much thought to it. And when I read Benny Morris's book, there were the names of those places. Those were the names of Palestinian towns that had been obliterated in
Mm,
1948.
mm. Well, it's a bit
And
like people
all of
driving.
this,
It's like people driving past Weehawken and not realizing that that's a Lenape name.
yes,
It's Weehawken, it's just
yes. And
it's
so
parallel with us.
what absolutely. And it 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 really hit me. Palestine was there right before my eyes the whole time I was there, and I never realized it for what it was. And that really opened my eyes. And actually, the bookstore in Woodstock, the Golden Notebook, that's where I bought all of those books. And the former owner, Barry Samuels, had set me up to teach a course on what was called the New History. So in the late 80s, early 90s, I taught that course a couple of times in Woodstock. And there were Zionists who came who were very vociferous in their opposition. They told me I was
Mm.
a liar and and I said, well, these are the same lies that I grew up with. If I could get with the truth, why can't you? They eventually left the course. It was very, very interesting and very intense to do that. And I had a run of public speaking at that time. Um, Eventually, I kind of gave up on that, and now October 7th has really brought me back to appear in public, and
Well,
here I am.
yeah, and it was very moving to hear you talk about that experience, that transition. I mean, I personally can't. I can relate, but I've never been through something like that. So it's a little. Well, I suppose I have because I was brought up as a British. My grandfather used to say. I remember he got a Christmas basket and he was opening it. He was very English, and it was a Christmas basket someone had given to them, and he opens it up and he's going through it and he says, he's one of these people that thought everything went pear shaped, as I say in Australia, after Churchill was voted out, right? So you know where he was coming from, and he's going through the Christmas basket and there's some chocolates and some candies and he picks up a thing of crowfoot and nuts or jam or something, and he says, "Oh, it's English, must be good." That was like we just had this idea that England was great, and everything to do with, and gradually it comes to this realization that the British Empire was so responsible for so many atrocities, and the myth and the lie of that was very difficult to get around. So I suppose in a way I can sort of,
Yeah.
I mean, it was the English that invented the concentration camps in South Africa. So but let's fast forward because before I let you go, I want to think about, and I want to leave the audience with some positive things that we can do, all of us, because there is so much outrage and there is so much despair amongst people as to seeing this happen. I mean, I was saying I interviewed Daniel Maté yesterday. And he's been very outspoken, and we were discussing this idea that that there has to be something positive that we can draw people in with, as opposed to just talking about all the sadness and the negative and the atrocities and the death and despair. Because people want to feel like they can do something. I mean, students are doing it, but what about people my age, older people who are going through what you have experienced?
Um, I'll connect that to the joint memorial that I attended via Zoom yesterday. It's interesting. It was supposed to be a Zoom. It was hacked. It was hacked by, I
Oh
guess,
boy.
Israeli hackers
Right,
that
right.
disrupted it. And eventually they were able to get the live feed onto Facebook. because somebody had hacked it, and uh, luckily the sponsors were able to sort that out,
Oh, it's
and we were able to
frightening.
witness it.
Yeah.
It was so these are the seeds of hope, um, um, and uh, and our young people, I guess, not surprisingly, are leading the way, and it, that's that's we're just at the beginning of this, and we're seeing it. We're seeing these demonstrations, and the institutions and the powers that be, and the Israel lobby, and the Democratic Party, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Israel lobby. Their reaction is brutal. Of course, it is.
Hmm.
They're scared. They're scared the way they were in 1968. They care more about Israel than they do about the United States, because if this doesn't destroy the chances of Biden being reelected, I don't know what will. But obviously Israel is more important, and Zionism is more important to the Democratic Party than American democracy is.
Mm.
And that's exactly what the Israel lobby and what Israel wants. They don't want a democracy. They don't want a democracy there. They don't want a democracy here.
Well,
They
I was
want authoritarianism. They want racism. They want bombs. They want genocide.
I was
Uh,
told by a friend, very nice man, who happens to be a rabbi and a settler, and he owns an olive farm, or he's part of an olive manufacturing. I didn't ask him where the olive trees came from, uh, and he actually said quite candidly, he said democracy doesn't work for Israel because it dilutes the gene pool, and he literally said, what, if we let everybody have an equal vote, we might end up having the Quran voted in as opposed to the Torah. And I thought, wow, so this person's actually telling me that democracy is really a bad idea. And that was a shocking revelation, for me, to hear, but it explained a lot.
well, the demonstrations before October 7th were pro-democracy, these tremendous
Yes.
demonstrations in Israel. But they were democracy for Israelis, for Jews. There wasn't, they weren't demonstrating for Palestine.
Neither are
Uh,
they
uh,
now, I think.
that was almost completely absent from the demonstrations, anything about Palestine. Uh, but uh, but the key, um, uh, Noam Chomsky many years ago wrote a book called The Fateful Triangle, and this is the triangle, and it's Israel, Palestine, and the United States. The United States holds the balance of power, and we can see uh, what what that power what about that power, as the people who have the power, is being threatened. We see it here, right here in our congressional district. We have a congressman who started his political career in a very positive way here in Ulster County, but he's completely bought by APAC.
Are we
And
discussing Pat Ryan by any chance?
yes,
Yes.
yes, and
No, he's a
it's
disappointment.
very, very disturbing. Listen, this is the man who thinks who claims he was in Iraq defending democracy. So, what an education about democracy he must have gotten at West Point, if he thinks he was in Iraq defending democracy.
Well,
Uh,
when I got one of his flyers the last time, he was running, he was there proudly displaying his military credentials, holding a weapon. And I thought, what has happened to the Democratic Party? It's like the Twilight Zone or something. We have to be more knuckleheaded than the people we're opposing. It's just baffling.
Years ago when Mario Cuomo was the governor of New York, I realized there was all this stuff about Kiryat Yoel, which I thought was awful back then. And one of the things I learned, one of the lessons I took from that, was that liberals, and I say that not as a liberal, way to the left of that. Uh, so liberals are so terrified of being labeled anti-Semitic that they just become useful idiots for
Mm,
the
mm,
worst trends within the Jewish world, whether it's the uh, Hasidic communities that don't mind destroying the non-Jewish communities' public education systems down in adjacent counties, or whether it's Zionism in Israel and its plan that has been in place since Theodore Herzl to absolutely positively get rid of the Palestinians. It was reading Edward Said's great book, The Question of Palestine, that he quotes Herzl from his private diaries, the plan to spirit the Palestinians across the border and scatter them into the Arab world. Uh, uh, this was in 1895. Zionism was just beginning. So that plan to marginalize and destroy any semblance of a national life for Palestinians has been here well over 100 years. It
mm.
didn't start in 1948. It did not start in
It
1967,
certainly didn't start on October 7th.
and it didn't start on October 7th. And people talk about, I mean, this is the bad history. People talk about the foundation of Israel was the Holocaust. Not at all.
Mm-mm.
The Yishuv, the Jewish settlement, self-governing settlement in Palestine up to the declaration of the state goes back decades before 1948. The
Well,
way I
well,
think of
well,
1948,
as a reformed imperialist
yeah,
British, the Balfour
absolutely,
Declaration. I mean,
absolutely.
that was
The,
a British concoction, right? So,
the British Empire is the godfather of Israel because it protected and nurtured the Yishuv through all of its years. I mean, it clamped down on immigration because of its need to keep a balance because of the real politic of World War II.
mm,
But the way I would like to explain it is the Holocaust was the Pitocin of the Zionist project. It hastened the birth, but which is what Pitocin is the accelerant of labor, of women's labor process,
oh, I see.
and women are given Pitocin to accelerate the process. So Zionism had Pitocin, and that was the Holocaust. And that's another story of the Zionist attitude towards the Jews of Europe, which was pretty dismissive while the Holocaust was going on.
Right.
Um, uh,
Well, yeah, as we say in Canada, kind of gave it a kick in the pants.
yep.
Um, well, Mark, this has been truly fascinating, and I hope that people watching are educated or reminded. Um, I hope they go out and buy Edward Said's book. um, uh, I'd like to ask you before I let you go to leave us with some parting thoughts, um, hopefully of a positive nature. But if not, that's fine too.
Um, well, I'll quote Herzl.
Okay.
Um, Herzl, the quote in Hebrew, and I'll say it in Hebrew and then I'll translate it into English. Im tirtzu en zu agada. Uh, it's usually translated in English as if you will it, it is no dream or it's not a legend. Uh, so it's a long, long road um, uh, uh, for everyone between the river and the sea to live free. Everyone, Jews and Palestinians, and whoever else wants to be there. Um, and it may not happen in our lifetime,
Mm,
um, but if we will it, if we follow the lead of hope and of of love and friendship and peace. Um, uh, we might just get there. As after the ceremony, there was another piece that came up on um, that people were wearing a T-shirt that said, "From the river to the sea, only peace will set you free." And um, uh, we're starting with a small minority who really truly believe that and see that as power. But maybe we'll get there. If you never know. That's what we have to keep working for.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Well,
I
thank
wish you
you.
the best of health and strength, and continue your our struggle. We're all in this together. That's how I feel. Even those whom we may oppose, we're all part of this. Sometimes I think, when you look at Earth from space and you see this beautiful planet, this magnificent, beautiful thing, and you think all of those things that are happening on that planet are happening, but we're all part of that beautiful space in the universe that we share, and we have to remember that. So thank you, sir. I appreciate it very much.
Well, it's an honor really to be here with you, Malcolm. Thank you very, very much.
I'll see you. Um,
Okay.
Thanks. Take care. Cheers. Shalom.